Welcome to St. Michael's Bible Study. We are working up the Bible study today for November 21st, Christ the King Sunday. And we're studying the King. What do you know? King David. And as we might learn from studying the Bible, all these kings give us a way to understand a little bit about Christ the King. So I hope you can read this with us. I hope you are, if able, to come to study on Sunday morning. But if any event, we hope that together, studying this, we are strengthened for the life God has given us and He has called us to by the study of His Word. Today we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 26 and Psalm 142. So you may want to grab your Bible, have that handy here. We're gonna look at this story about King David today, or not yet King David, story of David in the wilderness. He's still running away from King Saul. Saul is after him, trying to destroy him, sees him as a competitor, somebody who is threatening his rule over the land of Israel. And particularly, as Saul has said, threatening the rule of his dynasty, of his son Jonathan, whom he has designated to be the next king after Saul. And God has designated David. The story today is really one of frustration. As we read it, we're going to hear a lot of similarity and echo from a story we heard a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember David in the cave? David and King Saul. And at the end of that story, it said that Saul reconciled with David. And Saul had said, David, you are more righteous than I. David, you are going to be king. David, make me a promise you're not going to harm me or my heirs after me. Don't destroy my house, is what he says. And you would think, okay, that's the end of the story. David is no longer being hunted. But no, here in chapter 26, the cycle starts all over again. And this story seems to express an occasion for David to be frustrated. And that may be the emotion we're dealing with here as we read this story, is one of frustration itself. That David thinks he has solved the problem, but it's not solved. The Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, David is hiding in the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite Jeshimon. They've done this to him before. So Saul rose and went out to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul is encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite Jeshimon, beside the road. But David remained in the wilderness. When he heard that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed arrived. And then David goes out to the place where Saul had encamped, and David sees it. There is Abner, son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment while the army was encamped around him. So you apparently have this sort of moonlit scene. David's looking down over the encampment of King Saul. He's got 3,000 men around him. And there's the sort of the Secretary of War, maybe, or maybe the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is right there. It is Abner, son of Ner. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, who will go down with me into the camp of Saul? And Abishai said, I'll go down with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by night. They sneak in to this encampment. There Saul lay sleeping within the encampment, his spear stuck in the ground at his head. And Abner and the army lay around him. Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand today. Now, therefore, let me pin him to the ground with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice. This will be quick, it'll be clean, and it will be done. This is exactly what David's friends had counseled him to do in the cave. This story is repeating. It's not in a cave, it's now out in the open, but it's really repeating the same elements over again. David said, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him down, or his day will come to die. Or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should be the one to do this. This is not my call. This is not my vocation. I am not a killer of kings, at least not of the kings whom God has anointed. Take the spear that is at his head and his water jar, and let's go." So he grabs Saul's water bottle, You wonder whether it wasn't, emblazoned with some advertising of some Israelite company at that point. So David took the spear and the water jar, and they go away. No one saw it or knew it, nor did anyone awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had come over them. So God had put them all into this sort of deep, deep sleep. And so David's able to walk in and walk out. David goes over to the other side, and he stands on top of a hill some distance away. There's a great distance between them, it says. And David called to the army and to Abner, son of Ner. He calls to the guy who's supposed to be in charge of security for the king. "Abner, will you not answer?" And Abner says, "Who is this?" And David says, "Are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came to destroy your lord the king. This thing you've done is not good. We've had a breach of security here. And as the Lord lives, you should die. You've not kept watch over the Lord. See, here's his spear. Here's his water jug. Look for them there. They're not there because they're in my hand." Saul, by this point, has woken up and recognizes David's voice and says, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And David said, "It is my voice. Why does my Lord pursue his servant? Why are we having this conversation again? For what have I done? What guilt is in my hands? Now, therefore, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is mortals, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out today from my share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, 'Go serve other gods.' Now, therefore, do not let my blood fall to the ground away from the presence of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains." This is very reminiscent of David's speech to Saul after the incident in the cave. And then Saul responds, same words again. "I have done wrong. Come back, my son David. I will never harm you again. My life was precious in your sight today. I have been a fool and have made a great mistake." David replied, "Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and get it." Notice David does not come and bow down in front of him this time. "The Lord rewards everyone for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, but I would not raise my hand against you. As your life was precious today in my sight, so may my life be precious in your sight. And may he rescue me from all tribulation." Then Saul said to David, "Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them." And so David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. Again, here I think the division of the chapters in the Bible does us not necessarily a good service. Originally, there were, of course, no chapter divisions in the Bible. It was just simply a scroll with text written in it. And so you would have naturally just gone to the very next verse of chapter 27. David said in his heart, "I shall now one day perish by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines And then Saul will despair of seeking me anymore within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. And so David set out. We're going to read that story of David among the Philistines next week. But I think today what we see is David and the people of God, and maybe a little of ourselves, just frustrated. I mean, David has twice now gone to these extraordinary measures of sparing the life of a man who is trying to kill him. And at the end of both of them, the man has said, "You're right, David, I shouldn't hurt you anymore. I should not do this anymore." And yet it just keeps happening. And you hear David's despair, frustration at the end of that, where he says, "Yeah, maybe I just ought to go somewhere else. This is not working. I'm not getting anywhere." Frustration is a really powerful feeling people have. And the people of God in exile must have felt enormous frustration. For 70 years, they were held in a captivity. And even after that, for many years thereafter, they were frustrated. They really felt like things weren't moving. When they came back to rebuild the temple, it was hard, and they were kind of all expecting God to do these great things like he had done with Moses, and they were supposed to, they were expecting kind of plagues and, a pillar of fire to lead them, and throwing out the Canaanites in front of them like it happened in the days of Joshua, and none of that happened. The Persian king comes to the throne and says, "No, you guys can all go home now." And they kind of have to have bake sales to get money to get back there. They don't get, none of the miracles happen. And there's lots of red tape. They want to rebuild the city walls. They want to rebuild the temple. And there's people who don't like it. There's people who are fighting with each other. The neighbors don't like it. And, there's they file a petition with the local zoning board, and they don't get to do it. And it's just a mess. And they're just frustrated. Why is this so hard? Why is it so hard? Ever felt that way? I don't think you go too long without feeling a little bit of that. Well, the Psalter urges us to read these psalms, these emotional little poems in connection with these stories of David. And the one we're choosing today is maybe a little looser connection to this specific story, but I think it does something that I find really valuable. Turn to Psalm 142. Psalm 142. This is simply a maskil of David when he's in the cave. You got to remember, David's living in a cave this whole time. And if you've ever lived in a cave, I doubt any of you have, but you can imagine, it's not exactly pleasant. You get tired of this pretty quick. Cave dwelling, I mean, there's a reason. Our putative ancestors supposedly left the caves and lived somewhere else. Being a caveman's no fun. David utters a prayer. "With my voice I cry to the Lord. With my voice I make supplication to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit is faint, you know my way." Because, God, I'm going to tell you. "In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look on my right hand and see. There's no one who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for me. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Give heed to my cry, for I am brought very low. Save me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison so that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. Notice there's no real resolution on this one. David has hope. He has faith. He looks forward to God doing what he's going to do. But David doesn't give much in the way of a picture of it, because at the end of this psalm, unlike the psalms we have read before, David doesn't see it. And a lot of times, you and I don't get to see it. For me, as I look at this, I see a number of things that are really important, not the least of which is that our frustration and our sense of disappointment and our recurring themes of having to come back again and again to some of the same problems we have seen over and over again, that belongs in our relationship with God too. I think too often our world has said, oh, you believe now, so you should be happy all the time. You're a Christian, so everything should go swimmingly for you. You're on God's team, therefore God has your back. Well, for David, it really doesn't feel that way this day. And for a lot of people, it doesn't feel that way. And there's a time and a place and a part of our lives where it's quite appropriate to bring to God in prayer and song and worship those feelings of frustration and disappointment. We will continue to read the stories of David, and eventually we know, and the reader at the time knows, that David does eventually come to the throne and eventually rises to become the glorious king of Israel that everybody knows. But not every day was a reflection of that day. Some of them were hard. If you have any questions about this, send me an email. We'd love to hear from you. By all means, if you're able, come to class on Sunday morning. We hope to see you then. God bless you. Bye-bye.